Hello everyone, and welcome to the second special episode of Korean Cinema Today, where we will be discussing this year's major Lunar New Year releases here in Korea. Here in Seoul, this is Piers Conran, and I'm joined by Korean film critic Jason Bechervaise. Korean Cinema Today is a new podcast from KOBIZ, the online website for the Korean Film Council. The website, which is koreanfilm.or.kr, features the latest news, features, and interviews on Korean film. You can also find our webzine, titled Korean Cinema Today, subscribe to our newsletter, and, of course, tune in again to this podcast. Find us on Twitter at twitter.com/KoreanFilmBiz, that's B-I-Z, or on Facebook at facebook.com/kobiz.kofic, that's KOBIZ.KOFIC. To find this podcast again, you can find us on iTunes by searching for our name, Korean Cinema Today. This is Piers Conran, a journalist for the Korean Film Council and a Korean correspondent for international film site twitchfilm.com and the founder and editor of Korean film blog Modern Korean Cinema. In the studio with us today, we have Jason. Jason, thanks very much for being with us again.
Well, thanks for having me. It's an absolute pleasure.
So Jason, of course, is a contributor to international trade magazine, Screen International, as well as a movie critic for TBS EFM, Arirang, and EBS.
That's right.
So today we'll be looking at Lunar New Year films. So could you kick us off with a little bit of background info on what Lunar New Year's is?
Yes, Seolnal, as it's known in Korean, is one of the biggest festivals or holidays in the Korean calendar. That and Chuseok are the two big ones. It's a huge event for South Koreans because they go to their hometown, and there's this almost like an exodus, I think, the day before or a couple of days before the actual day. And you have to book tickets well in advance. It's a huge event, like I say, but it's also big for the cinema. People tend to go to the cinema as families, and so films that tend to appeal to a wide demographic tend to perform well, as seen with films like Miracle in Cell Number 7, and which was phenomenally successful this time last year.
Indeed, a very popular time for families to go to the theaters. So let's have a little look at some of the past films that have done really well, that have scored hits in Lunar New Year.
Yeah, well, last year, 2013, we had Miracle on Cell Number 7, like we just mentioned, and also the Berlin File as well. That became, I think, the most popular Korean action film.
Yeah.
Selling, I think, over 7 million.
Just over
7 million tickets. And so they were two very, very popular films of last year. And then in 2012, we had two other films that performed very well. Dancing Queen, which I think again attracted a wide demographic. You had the older audiences as well as the younger audiences. Mm-hmm. I remember going to see that with my in-laws. I'm married to a South Korean, and I went to see Dancing Queen with my wife and my mother and father-in-law. And that's just typical of a kind of Seolnal or a Lunar New Year. You often have food together, then you'll go out and watch a film together. And so it's incredibly popular, and so you have to book tickets in advance, and it's a very, very busy time for cinemas.
So looking at last year's films, Miracle in Cell Number 7, of course, was the biggest film of 2013 with 12.8 million admissions, eventually becoming the third most successful Korean film of all time. A huge figure, and one that I think I can safely say no one expected.
Yeah, it was the quintessential example of a sleeper hit. I went to see, I think, on its opening weekend. I'll confess I didn't like the film, which made me think, okay, will this be successful or not? But the audience, I could tell, really enjoyed it. So I thought, okay, well, maybe it'd be successful. But 12.8 million admissions, that's a phenomenal feat, and I didn't expect it to do as well as it did. It made a huge amount of money for the film's distributor, New. It's just a remarkable success story.
Huge, and I think before that we were all expecting the Berlin File to top the Lunar New Year's charts.
Yeah, I mean it's interesting because the Berlin File was a much anticipated film. It had a big cast: Ha Jung-woo, Jeon Ji-yeon, and Yoo Sung-bom, and a big director, Yoo Sung-won, as well. It's a Korean action movie that takes place in Germany or Berlin, and so you think, wow, this film is going to be really, really good, and it's a good film. It's a very well orchestrated film. And I think if you looked at both of those films, you say, well, of course it's going to be Berlin File that are going to do well. Miracle in Cell Number 7, I'm not so sure about that. But in fact, it was Miracle in Cell Number 7 that trumped the Berlin File in some fashion.
Absolutely. I mean, and as you're saying, it being a family holiday, I suppose Miracle in Cell Number 7 is potentially the film that has the wider audience, whereas the Berlin File is a little more male-centric and not necessarily a family-driven film.
Yeah, just going back to that important fact when it comes to the Lunar New Year is that the films that tend to have a wider reach in terms of their appeal and in terms of the ages that they're trying to attract. That seems to be the very, very important factor.
Absolutely. One film that really never struck me as a Lunar New Year film was Unbowed, which came out in 2012. Again, also quite a sleeper hit. Of course, it's with An Sung-ki playing a professor who was on
a maths professor. That's right. Yeah,
in a court trial, and so this is set in the 90s. It's based on a true story, courtroom film. Not really what you would expect.
Very different. But I think this is another trait you often find. What we have found in Korean cinema is it's a film that's socially quite conscious. It's tackling social issues. It looked at the justice system. We saw this with Silenced or The Crucible as well, which looked at the way kids with learning difficulties or hearing impairment and the treatment that they get, and that went on to cause a massive social outcry, and rightly so. And I think this film, whilst it doesn't appeal to that big pool of people, I think the film tackled some issues that I think local audiences really responded to.
Definitely. And of course, currently we have The Attorney, another film that's kind of hit that same vein.
Yeah, it's phenomenal how successful The Attorney's been. I remember I went to the press screening, and I absolutely loved the film, and I was really, really quite surprised how well the film was made. This director, Yang Woo-suk, hasn't made a film before. He's I think a webcomic, webtoon writer, and so I was quite surprised how well the film was made. But again, it looks at some politics and social issues, and I think the audiences have responded to that.
Absolutely. Just a few more past Lunar New Year releases. In 2011, all of those seemed kind of like pretty much geared towards families. Detective K, the period investigative comedy. Battlefield Heroes, another period film. And then Glove, the kind of human interest sports drama. Yeah,
I mean, the one out of those three films, I think Detective K is the one that really stands out. Again, that I think it attracted quite a wide demographic, some older folk and some of the younger folk too, because that film is a period drama, but like I said in I think the last podcast, there's a kind of contemporary feel to that as well. And so I think some of the younger audiences responded to it.
Absolutely. Now, it hasn't always been a Korean film on top at the box office during Lunar New Year. In 2009, John Woo's Red Cliff 2 actually topped the charts at that point.
Yeah, John Woo he's not the most consistent director, but I think he struck gold with that film, and again, I think I think that film tended to attract both young and older audiences.
So anyway, all to say that you can never really tell what's going to happen.
Yeah, exactly. It's unpredictable. And then in 2010 we had Secret Reunion, which is another spy film that did very well indeed.
Absolutely. So we have 4 big films coming out for this holiday in 2014. Looking at running on the list, we have Miss Granny from CJ Entertainment, When a Man Loves a Woman from New, which is Next Entertainment World, Hot Young Bloods from Lotte Entertainment, and then The Huntresses from Showbox. So let's look at Miss Granny first. This is the new film from director Hwang Dong-hyuk, who directed Silence, which Jason, you just mentioned before, and he also made 2007's Father. The film stars Shim In-kyung, who was a delightful presence in Sunny back in 2011, and also the older actress Na Moon-hee. So Na Moon-hee plays...
she plays the grandmother, the 74-year-old grandmother, and then you have Shim In-kyung who plays the 20-year-old. And I think the casting here is very clever, really, because with like going back to our original point, with the Lunar New Year, you have a lot of different ages going to cinema, and the thing is, Na Moon-hee is a huge name in Korean cinema, but not just Korean cinema, but Korean dramas as well. She often plays these kind of grandmother figures, and so that will be very appealing for the older audiences, whereas Shim In-kyung, she's a much younger actress, and she will appeal to the younger audiences as well, so you'll have that good mix there of young and old. And I haven't seen the film in its entirety. I've just seen clips here and there, but the level of the production values look really, really strong, and it looks like a very entertaining film. And what Shin In-kyung is very good at is that she's very theatrical. She's great with these kind of expressions. That's something that I love about Song Kang-ho as well. But she does it in her own very unique way, and that's what you saw in Sunny, and I think that's what she does here. And I think it will appeal to not just to the younger audience actually, but to the older audience as well, which was what I think a factor in Sunny's success.
Absolutely. So we have I had the chance to see the film at the recent press screening, and I think it's definitely a crowd pleaser. It's obviously geared towards getting a larger demographic. You have the same character as a 20-year-old and as a 70-year-old, and of course the family dynamics that surround that. So it's very keenly programmed for Lunar New Year, and if my guess is the film will do quite well. The next film then is When a Man Loves a Woman. This is the debut of director Han Dong-wook, who was previously an assistant director on Ryu Seung-hwan's The Unjust. The film stars Hwang Jong-min and Han Ye-jin, and this features Hwang Jong-min as a former gangster who then gets involved in a romance and develops a terminal illness. Something we've seen quite a few times in Korean cinema before.
Yeah, You Are My Sunshine, of course, back in 2005. I quite like the casting here. Han Jong-min, he's a big name in Korean cinema. We've seen him in countless films. You Are My Sunshine, of course, and The Unjust. New World, just to name a few. He's a terrific actor. He has a huge range in his acting skills as well. And I quite like Han Hyun-jin. She was in 26 Years. And so I quite like the casting, and that's what really strikes me about this film is the casting. And then you have the fact that it's distributed by NEW, who have a fantastic track record. Last 2013, every film they made was box office success pretty much, ranging from films like New World to Miracle in Cell Number 7 and The Attorney. So there's a lot going for this film. It's a new director, so a bit uncertain in terms of how well the film will be directed. But as we saw with The Attorney, that was a new director, turned out very, very well, a massive accomplishment. So we'll have to wait and see.
Certainly. And next one we have is from Lotte, which is Hot Young Bloods, a title that I hope that they revise before the film is released. I believe it was called Blood Boiling Youth. So this is a period film set in the 80s.
Yeah, this movie is set within the early 1980s in Hongseong, South Korea, and the movie depicts the love lives and friendship of high school students, and it's directed by Lee-yeon-woo, he made Running Turtle back in 2009, starring Kim Yoon-suk. And what's interesting about this film is it it's part of this nostalgia trend, which has really captured Korean audiences. We've seen this in films such as Sunny back in 2011, and 1980s nostalgia. I remember seeing that in the cinema, and the audiences, some of the older demographic, they were really getting involved in the film, to the music and everything. And we've seen films like Architecture 101, Nameless Gangster. Again, it's this kind of nostalgic feel that they bring, and it's even it's even led to re-releases of films. We've seen this with kind of Western films. We saw it with Leon. We've seen it with Terminator 2 Judgment Day that were re-released here as part of this trend. And we've seen Korean dramas such as Reply 1994, Reply 1997. They've really, I think, ignited this trend in nostalgia. So it'd be interesting to see if this will be part of that successful trend. And it stars Park Bo-young, who I quite like as well. She has a good record at the box office. She was in A Werewolf Boy. She played the lead actress in that film, and Speedy Scandal as well, with Cha Tae-yeon. So I'm quite excited about this film. It looks really interesting.
Definitely. And another big star in the film is Lee
Jung Suk,
who was in The Face Reader. He's been in a lot of films in the last few years. However, I don't know if he's demonstrated that he can carry a film by himself yet. His last one was No Breathing, which really did not do very well in Korea.
It didn't do very well at all, did it?
No, but perhaps that wasn't the...
It needed to be resuscitated.
Indeed. So the last of the four films is The Huntresses. Now, this is from Showbox. This is a period action comedy, and it's the fifth feature of director Park Jae-hyun. This film we've been hearing about this film for a long time. It was originally slated to be released, I believe it was last spring, and it was pushed back. There were apparently some technical problems, and they needed time to fix the effects, and I guess they decided to reschedule during the Lunar New Year. So this is looking like kind of a Korean Charlie's Angels. You have Ha Ji-won, Kang Ye-won, and Son Ga-in. What do you think the prospects of this film are?
Well, it could go either way. I mean, it's the perfect time to release this film. I think if there was a time to release it, it would be now. It's been in the works for a long time. I think it could potentially appeal, back to our original point, it could appeal to a wider audience. But like you say, it has had a troubled production. It has been in the works for a long period of time. And it is a kind of a Korean spin-off of Charlie's Angels. You've got three beautiful musketeers who fight against a powerful group who tries to overturn the royal family and gain absolute power. And so, yeah, I mean, it'll be interesting to see how well it does. You have the leader of the three beautiful musketeers, and she's called Jinok, who's played by Ha Ji-won, who's a huge actress in Korea. She plays a smart and righteous woman. And then you have Hongdan, played by Kang Ye-won, who's the only married woman among the three women. And then you have Gang-bi, played by Song Ga-in, who's the youngest among the musketeers, and she excels at fighting. So quite a physical film. The cast is very interesting. Like I say, Ha Ji-won, she's a big actress, but not everything that she's been in has been successul.
No.
Sector 7, of course,
7,
which was a box office disaster. But nonetheless, she has been in many hits. Haeundae, of course, is a big hit. And then you have Kang Ye-won as well, and Song Ga-in as well. So it could go either way. I think it will make money during the New Year, but whether it can continue to make money beyond that will be dependent on word of mouth. Now, word of mouth in Korea is so important because the internet plays such a big part, and if word gets out that the film isn't very good or is disappointing, then it will probably make money during the New Year, but then will probably struggle afterwards. Yeah.
So it's definitely a bit of a gamble. What's curious is the release timing. We have the previous three films are all being released a week before. Miss Granny and When a Man Loves a Woman on the 22nd, and then Hot Young Bloods on the 23rd. Now, Huntresses is being released the following Wednesday on the 29th. Seems a bit risky.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's sometimes it's difficult to determine what's going on in terms of the minds of when to schedule these films, because there's so many factors involved. But if you do release it later on, then I guess there's less risk of it doing badly during the new year. But then it means that if it is a bad film, it won't make much money later on. Whereas if you release a film earlier on and you've got faith in that film, then generally speaking, if word of mouth is strong, then it'll go on to kind of make a lot of money. The Attorney is a good example, because the press screening for that film was well in advance. It was
3 weeks.
3 weeks, and so they knew they had something that was very special, and they needed to create the buzz. And so I think that does play a part in terms of how they feel and how confident they are with the film. But I do stress there are other factors involved, and there is a busy release schedule before the actual Sonne. We've got 3 films released, so that may be a part as well, that they didn't want to release the film at the same time, have it released a week later.
4 films, all quite different. Which ones do you think are going to do very well?
Miss Granny, I think, will do well. I think in terms of the audience that it will attract, it'll be quite wide-ranging. It looks like a quite polished production. It looks humorous, and the thing about Korea is that age plays a huge part, and how you address people and that kind of thing, and more so than certainly from where I'm from the UK. Age plays a factor like everywhere else, but in Korea it's more pronounced. And I think in this movie, where you've got this 74-year-old woman who regains her appearance from the age of 20, I think that could have quite an interesting play in terms of how you address one another. So it could be a very, very entertaining film. I quite like the look of When a Man Loves a Woman in terms of the cast, but directors unknown, and Hot Young Bloods in terms of the whole nostalgia trend. That looks quite interesting. So The Huntresses, it could go either way. I mean, I'm a bit concerned with the trouble production, but it doesn't necessarily mean it's going to be a bad film. World War Z is a good example of that, a Hollywood film where it had a huge history of problems and then turned out to be a box office success. So
definitely. I agree with you about Miss Granny. Now, having seen the film myself, I do really see this as a crowd pleaser, and I'd be surprised if it didn't do well. It seems like it's going to hit all the quadrants, all the demographics it needs to be a nationwide hit. When a Man Loves a Woman, it's a film I'm quite curious to watch. I like the star. It might be a very good movie. I don't know if it has a huge amount of potential because it's not a family film.
Right. It seems a bit of an odd time to release it, isn't it? Yeah.
I mean, also, I imagine the budget is not very, very big on this. You tend to keep their prices down. You have one big star, but besides that, the costs are probably not too high. So they probably don't need their break-even point is probably much lower than the other projects. Hot Young Bloods, I think, could do quite well. This nostalgia trend, as you've highlighted before, will certainly work in its favor. 2 big young stars. So you have young stars can draw in the younger viewers. The nostalgia factor will bring in the older viewers.
Right.
So that's it has that working in its favor.
Yeah, there's a number of films that I'm looking forward to. I think potentially they could all do well. Whether they all do well is another thing. But Korean cinema is doing very, very well at the moment. We saw 2013 as a record-breaking year, and it closed off with a great big bang with the success of The Attorney and The Suspect. And I think going on the back of that, the Seoul Now, or the Korean Lunar New Year, is going to be a big one. There's 4 potentially big box office successes here. Whether they can all become box office successes remains to be seen. But I think at least a couple of these will go on to do very well indeed.
Definitely, I've learned never to underestimate the Korean film industry.
Never, you can never underestimate it. Definitely.
Yeah. I mean, after 2012 was already a very big year, we reached a lot of records in the country. But then last year just trounced them all, another 10% increase.
Yeah, I remember like this time last year I was talking on a few programs, and we're saying like how can 2013 surpass 2012, because 2012 was a huge year. It was the first year that Korean films had surpassed 100 million emissions, and you had the success of Kim Ki-duk's Pieto on the independent sector, winning this big prize at the Venice Film Festival. And so, like, how can 2013 surpass 2012? Yet here we are. We're like, how can 2014 surpass 2013? So, never underestimate, like you say, the Korean film industry.
Indeed. But I wonder, is saturation close? I mean,
so how far can the ceiling go? Yeah, I mean, I don't know. I mean, all booms, if we generally burst at some point, or the bubble burst at some point, and so we'll have to wait and see. But the thing is with the Korean film industry is that it has a solid infrastructure. And so I think the industry can support any periods of decline. I don't think it will decline, but maybe when it stagnates, I think it can support it. And also, what's important about the Korean film industry is that it has a wonderful exhibition sector, and I think that's something that's often overlooked because the cinema chains here are well advanced, and it's very easy to go to the cinema. People can book tickets with their smartphones, and it's a very convenient and relatively inexpensive form of entertainment, and I think that supports the local film industry very, very well.
You mentioned the infrastructure, of course, where Korean film is very strong. Now, they've been through these kind of problems before. In 2006 and 2007, the industry suddenly crumbled. And so, we're hoping that they've learned from their mistakes. Looking at these films, save for the Huntresses, actually, they seem like relatively modest productions. They don't seem very expensive. Not certainly much less than last year's The Berlin File.
Yeah, we don't have any the Berlin Files here. It's interesting that we have a film like Miss Granny, which follows on perhaps from the success of Miracle and Son Number 7, and so the production cost won't be as high, although the production itself looks very, very polished. So it doesn't look like a cheap film by any stretch of the imagination. But yeah, we don't have any huge production, in terms of production values. In terms of the cost, we don't have many of those, but that can be a good sign. I think sometimes it's concerning if we see films that are very, very expensive and we see lots of them be released, and I guess that's the danger. We're talking about period films. There's no fewer than 6 period films, and they all have a relatively high budget, and how can they all succeed? And so you do think about the latter end of 2006. I remember when The Host was released. After The Host, you had a catalogue of Korean films that were released because there's so much faith in the industry following the success of The Host, and yet so many of them failed. And then 2007 was a bad period for Korean films. But I think the industry is strong enough to sustain any period of stagnation or even decline, but I don't think that will happen. As we keep saying, you can never underestimate the local film industry here.
And particularly after last year, we had Snowpiercer, the biggest budget Korean film of all time.
I think some people were worried about that film. It was a $40 million budget film. It had an international cast. Bong Joon-ho is a proven director, yet I think some people were concerned with the cost of the production and the fact that it was shot abroad, and there were so many things that were uncertain. And yet it became a massive box office success here, a critically acclaimed hit as well, and it did well in France. And I think it will go on to do very well in many other territories, as we've seen with France, but also in terms of the reviews that we've seen, and it has been very, very well received indeed.
Internationally, particularly.
Exactly.
But, it remains to be seen, of course, when it'll be released in English territories, but that is in itself another discussion.
Yeah.
So we just have a few more minutes. So why don't we consider some of the new films coming out beyond Lunar New Year's this year? There's a lot of projects that we're excited about. In our previous episode, we had a chance to talk about some period films. Is there anything else in the next few months that's caught your eye?
Yeah, there's a couple of films that look quite interesting. The Law of Pleasure, which stars Moon So-ri and Jung-hwa. It's directed by Kwak Chun-in, who made Couples, and that also starred Jung-hwa as well. And so I'm quite looking forward to that. It looks like quite an erotic movie, but this director, he's quite clever, and he's good at. He's not just a good filmmaker, but he's a good storyteller. So I'm quite curious to see that. We've got High Heels, so we're seeing the return of Jang Jin, who's he's not just a renowned filmmaker, but he's a renowned storyteller. He's very famous for his scripts, for the use of humor, and he's done a lot of work recently, I think, in television. So he's kind of got a bit he's gone off to do some other entertainment things, but it's good to see him back making films, and I'm looking forward to that. And that stars local star Cha Seung-won. What about you, Piers? Any films that you're looking forward to?
Well, I mean, High Heels actually is one I'm very keen to see, because I'm a big fan of Jang Jin. The films that he's directed, like Someone Special, or that he's written, such as Going by the Book or Welcome to Dongmakul, or some of my favorite Korean films. So seeing him come back is great. He was gone for a while, and he was hosting Saturday Night Live, or directing Saturday Night Live in Korea. An interesting diversion from his career as a film director.
Yeah, and Korea's Got Talent, I think he was on as a judge.
Really?
Because he's obviously very good at finding talent. But I just love his use of wit. He's a very witty guy, and I love his scripts. I like his films. His films don't always do very well.
That's true.
We have films that do well and films that don't do so well. But yeah, I do like his. I mean, even films like Good Morning, Mr. President. It's kind of a little bit cheesy, but it's something endearing about his films. There's always something that really attracts your attention. And
he's a terrific writer.
Absolutely terrific writer.
So that's certainly one we're both very much looking forward to. Another film I'm quite curious about is Dohia, which will be pairing Bae-duna and child actress Kim Se-ron. Now, I believe
two great actresses there.
Yes.
You've got Bae-duna, who's just come back from her movie experience, or making films in the United States, abroad. Cloud Atlas, of course, by the Wachowski siblings.
And the new one, Jupiter Ascending.
Jupiter Ascending as well. So it'd be good to see her back into the local film industry. I think it's great that actors or actresses and directors go off and do their thing abroad, but I think it's important they come back home and do local projects. And we've seen that with Lee Byung-hun. He goes off and does G.I. Joe and Red 2, but he comes back and
makes
Masquerade. He comes back and he does local films too, and I think it's good to get a good balance there. And Bae-duna seems to be doing that. And Kim Se-ron, who's a very good, very talented child actress, and so
she's terrific.
We saw her in Ajusi, or The Man from Nowhere,
or Barbie, which is wonderful.
Barbie as well,
by director Lee Sang-woo. Now, I've forgotten, but Lee Chang-dong is somehow involved with this film, isn't he? Is he the producer, or did he write it?
I'm not entirely sure. I think he's assigned as the producer, but I'm not sure if he was he's credited as writer as well.
Maybe not writer, but then producer. There's something about his name attached that got me even more excited about this film. Okay, so that's a few more films in addition to the Seoul releases that we can look forward to this year. As always, plenty of exciting Korean films on the horizon. Jason, thank you very much for joining us for this episode.
Oh, thank you so much for having me, Piers. Much appreciated.
So that concludes our second special episode on the special Lunar New Year's releases this year in Korea. Thank you very much for listening, and to check our podcast again, find us on iTunes by searching for Korean Cinema Today. This is your host, Piers Conran. Thanks again for listening.